In Chapter 16, we begin talking about the circle of fifths. The circle of fifths is an important concept for students to understand basic key signatures, how to create major and minor scales, and how to build chords and determine interval qualities. In Chapter 16, we discuss the circle of fifths, the order of sharps and flats, key signatures, how to calculate the circle of fifths from scratch, and we also learn how enharmonically equivalent key signatures are created and how to identify practical and theoretical key signatures. These are all important concepts for understanding how to analyze music, how to perform a work that's in different keys, and for learning how to create your own music, if that's something that you are interested in. Once a musician understands how the circle of fifths works, it becomes possible to learn how to construct all of the major and minor scales as well as irrelevant key signatures. The circle of fifths is essentially a tool that makes it easier to identify intervals using their proper names, create scales, and construct chords. So musicians use the circle of fifths for many reasons. A few of the most common reasons are to calculate the major and minor key signatures, calculate major and minor scales, and to determine what chords to use in a new musical composition. The circle of fifths also allows musicians to identify intervals using both the interval and the interval quality. So in the past, we've only identified intervals based on their generic distance, a fifth or a fourth. An interval that is a third is 3 notes apart. But we can also identify intervals based on their quality, such as major or minor. So the term major is a type of interval. The term minor is also a type of interval. It indicates how the interval actually sounds, and it differentiates the different types of thirds and fourths and fifths from each other. Now, before we get into talking about how to construct the circle of fifths, it's important to memorize the order of sharps and flats. A concept known as a key signature appears at the beginning of the staff system. A key signature lets the musician know what notes in the piece should be played sharp or flat. Key signatures never use both sharps and flats. It's always one or the other. So you're not going to see a key signature that has 3 sharps and 2 flats. That just doesn't occur. And the other thing about sharps and flats is that they have to occur in a very specific order. So if you look at the first image where you have the sharps, you'll notice the first sharp is on the 5th staff line, which we know in the treble clef is an F. So the first sharp is an F sharp. The next one on the 3rd space is a C sharp. On the top space above the staff system, you have a G sharp. And then on the 4th line, you have a D sharp. On the 2nd space, an A sharp. And then on the 4th space, an E sharp, and the final sharp in the middle of the staff system is a B sharp. So it's important that you memorize the order of sharps. There are only 7 sharps to memorize, but it's very crucial that you learn these quickly. So the order of sharps is F, C, G, D, A, E, B. And they also have to be written on the staff in a particular manner. So the F sharp always has to be on the 5th line. The C sharp always has to be on the 3rd space. The G sharp always has to be above the staff in the treble clef. The D sharp is always on the 4th line. So the spacing and the position on the staff matters. Now, if you have an F sharp on the very top of the staff, it will apply to any F in the entire piece. So that F sharp that's listed in the treble clef is actually, if you remember from the octave registers, that would be an F sharp 5. So if you have an F4 somewhere in the staff and the key signature has an F sharp 5 listed, that F sharp 5 basically means any F in the entire piece is going to be played sharp. So an F4 would be played sharp, an F3 would be played sharp. It doesn't matter what register it's in. The key signature applies to every note in the piece. So essentially what a key signature tells you is what notes in the piece should be played sharp or flat. And this is a simpler way of writing music, because musicians, they start to learn what the key of D, how many sharps it has, or the key of B, how many sharps it has. And then they just know, because they get a lot of practice performing in different key signatures, they just know how each note should be raised or lowered based on the key signature, and it makes it easier to sight read because you start to get used to certain patterns that occur over and over again in each key. If you look at the order of flats in the next image with a treble clef, it starts on B flat, and then it goes up to E flat, down to A flat, up a fourth to D flat, down a fifth to G flat, up a fourth to C flat, and then down a fifth to F flat. If you'll notice in the bass clef, that F flat actually occurs right below the staff. That's the correct positioning for the bass clef F flat. You shouldn't put that F flat in the staff system on the fourth line. You don't want to do that. It should mimic the exact structure of the treble clef. So you've got the treble clef where everything's in the staff, the bass clef, the F is below the staff, but in order to maintain continuity between the treble and the bass, we just keep the F flat in the same place. Musicians get used to looking at the last flat and just instantly knowing the key signature. So it's important to keep the flats in the correct place because you don't want musicians to have to question what you're trying to say with an unusually placed key signature. So the order of flats then is B, E, A, D, G, C, F. Now if you notice, the last flat is a F. The first sharp in the order of sharps is also an F. The second to last flat is a C. The second sharp is a C. So the order of flats, if you look at that and you read it backwards, it's actually the order of sharps going forward. So if you just memorize the order of sharps, and you learn that the order of sharps is F, C, G, D, A, E, B, then you've also learned the order of flats, because the order of flats is just the order of sharps written backwards. So instead of starting on F for the flats, you start on B and go the opposite direction. Now, I have to reiterate this because it's a very important point, but the order that sharps and flats are placed on the staff matters. That F sharp always has to be on the top line in both the treble and in the bass clef. It'll actually be on the fourth line, but that'll be the top F sharp line in the piece. And flats always have to start on the B line, right in the middle of the staff, or in the case of the bass clef, the second line of the staff. And the only thing that I will point out again is that the F flat in the bass clef does occur below the staff. It may look a little bit weird, but that is how it's written in the bass clef. You don't want to move that F up an octave. It wouldn't look right to musicians. And they're used to seeing flats and sharps in a particular order and in a particular fashion. So you don't want to have, for example, in the treble clef, if you have a sharp key signature, you don't want to have F sharp followed by G sharp without a C sharp in between, because the musician is going to assume there's a C sharp there. If you need to use a C natural and your key signature has F sharp, C sharp, and G sharp in it, then what you have to do is use a natural within the piece to make that C sharp natural. And that will tell the musician that the music is using notes that are not natively found in the key signature, which is an important concept when you get into more advanced theory concepts. It may have to do with a concept known as mode mixture or something else. But the point is that there's certain reasons for these rules, and it takes a while to actually learn all the different reasons and why we do things the way we do them. So key signatures essentially indicate the sharps and flats, and that's really sharps or flats, that should be used in a composition. They're placed right after the clef sign, but before the time signature. You notice in the image you've got the treble clef sign, the order of sharps, and then a 4/4 in the first image. And then you have a bass clef, sharps, 4/4. In the bottom one, same thing. You've got your treble clef, your flats, and then your time signature. So it's always clef, key signature, time signature. That order is important. It's also important to note there are flat and sharp key signatures, but again, there are no key signatures that use both sharps and flats in the same key. And key signatures can have a maximum of 7 sharps or 7 flats. And if you can remember these basic rules, then you'll be in pretty good shape for the remaining content that you have to learn. So now the first interval that you have to learn is the perfect fifth. We have to learn the perfect fifth because the circle of fifths rotates around, starting with the key of C, in perfect fifths. Now I'll explain this in more detail in a moment. But a perfect fifth consists of 2 main components. You have to have both components in order to figure out what a perfect fifth is. First, you have to go up 5 scale degrees. So if you start on the note C, to find a note a fifth above it, you have to count up from C and counting C. So C, D, E, F, G. That's 5 note names. So we know that the distance from C to G is some sort of fifth, but we don't know if it's a perfect fifth yet. The only way to figure out if it's a perfect fifth is to also count up 7 half steps. So if you look at your ascending chromatic scale starting on the note C, if you go to C sharp, that's 1 half step. C sharp to D is 2. D to D sharp is 3. D sharp to E is 4. E to F is 5. F to F sharp is 6. F sharp to G is 7. So what that tells us is that C to G is both a generic fifth and a perfect fifth because there are 7 half steps. As another example, let's say you start on the note E and you have to count up 5 letter names. So you go E, F, G, A, B. So we know that from E to B is a fifth. Now we have to figure out if E to B is a perfect fifth. So to do that, we have to make sure there are 7 half steps between E and B. So E to F is 1, F to F sharp is 2, F sharp to G is 3, G to G sharp is 4, G sharp to A is 5, A to A sharp is 6, and A sharp to B is 7. So E to B is a perfect fifth. So let's do one where it doesn't end on the same accidental quality. So in other words, first we went from C natural to G natural. That was a perfect fifth. From E to B is also E natural to B natural. There are a few where you'll move from a natural to a sharp or a natural to a flat. It just depends on where you're starting in the scale. So one example of this would be from B to F. So let's go ahead and calculate a perfect fifth above B. I'm going to give you a second to try and figure this out on your own first. So you've got to do 2 things. First, you have to count up 5 scale degrees from B, figure out what note that is. And then you have to count up 7 half steps and figure out whether the note above B is sharp, flat, or natural. If you need more time, I'm going to give you about 2 seconds to pause the slideshow because I'm going to give you the answer. Okay, so you should have figured out the answer by now, and now you're continuing the slideshow. So starting on B, we have to count up 5 scale degrees. So B, C, D, E, F. So we now know that B to F is some sort of fifth, but we have to figure out if it's a perfect fifth. So now we have to count up 7 half steps. So B to C is 1 half step, C to C sharp is 2, C sharp to D is 3, D to D sharp is 4, D sharp to E is 5, E to F is 6, and then F to F sharp is 7. So what this means is B to F sharp is a perfect fifth, not B to F. B to F would not be a perfect fifth. It'd be another interval that we'll talk about when we actually discuss the different types of intervals we have. But for now, all you need to know is how to calculate a perfect fifth. And you need to be able to calculate a perfect fifth above and a perfect fifth below. So let's just do one example of a perfect fifth below a note. Let's start with C. Try and figure out what a perfect fifth below C is. You've got to do the same thing. Count down 5 scale degrees instead of up, and then count down 7 half steps instead of up, because we're trying to figure out the note below, a perfect fifth below C. So I'm going to give you about 2 seconds to pause the presentation, and then I'm going to give you the answer. So try and figure this out on your own. Okay, so let's work through this. If you haven't figured it out yet, please pause the presentation, because I'm going to tell you the answer now, and it's really important you try and figure this stuff out on your own first. So starting on C, we have to count down 5 letter names, 5 scale degrees. So we have C, B, A, G, F. So we know from C down to F is some sort of a fifth. So now we have to count down 7 half steps. So C to B is 1, B to B flat is 2, B flat to A is 3, A to A flat is 4, A flat to G is 5, G to G flat is 6, and G flat to F is 7. So since there are both 5 scale degrees and 7 half steps from C down to F, that is a perfect fifth. Let's do one more. Figure out what a perfect fifth below F is. I'm going to give you about 2 seconds to pause the presentation, and then when you figure out the answer, go ahead and resume the presentation, and I will give you the answer. We'll work through it together. Okay, so you should know the answer by now. If not, press pause, figure out the answer, and then come back to see if you got it right. So starting on F, we have to go down 5 scale degrees. So F, E, D, C, B. So we know that from F to B is some sort of fifth. Now we have to figure out if it's a perfect fifth, and if not, what note would be a perfect fifth below F. So we have to count down 7 half steps. So F to E is 1, E to E flat is 2, E flat to D is 3, D to D flat is 4, D flat to C is 5, C to B is 6, so we have to go one more half step. B to B flat is 7. So a perfect fifth below F is B flat. So if you said B flat, you got it right. Now, this is really important, because if you take C sharp to G sharp as an example, you count up 5 scale degrees from C sharp and you get the note G, and then you count up 7 half steps from C sharp and you get the note G sharp. But enharmonically, A flat is also a G sharp. They sound the same. So C sharp to G sharp and C sharp to A flat are going to be the same exact pitch to our ears, but written down on a musical score, C sharp to G sharp and C sharp to A flat are different intervals. C sharp to G sharp is a perfect fifth, but C sharp to A flat is not. It's some type of sixth. So it's very important that you understand that the 5 scale degrees and the 7 half steps, you have to have both of those components in order to create a perfect fifth. Even though C sharp to G sharp and C sharp to A flat do sound the same, they are not the same interval when you write them down. So it's very important you write them down correctly. Here's another example, the last point here. From D sharp to A is also not a perfect fifth. D, E, F, G, A is 5 letter names, and you can also think of it as scale degrees, but there are only 6 half steps. You need one more half step to make that a perfect fifth. So it would have to be from D sharp to A sharp. D sharp to B flat is also not a perfect fifth, because D sharp to B flat is 6 scale degrees. So hopefully that's clear. It's a very important concept that you really need to understand for both this chapter and the chapter that deals with intervals. So now we have 2 types of circle of fifths. There's a major circle of fifths and a minor circle of fifths. And often what you'll see is a major circle fifth will be on the outside of a circle, and then they'll put a minor circle of fifths on the inside. But for now, we're going to put the sharps on the outside going to the right and the flats on the inside going to the left. So the first thing you need to know is that the circle of fifths in major begins on C at the top. And if you'll notice, if you go around, there's essentially 12 positions on this circle, just like a clock. Notice how B, F sharp, and C sharp at the bottom of the circle, at about the 5, 6, and 7 o'clock position, those correspond to their enharmonic key signatures, C flat, G flat, and D flat. So if you write a piece in B major, you could also write it in C flat major, and there might be a reason for wanting to write it in one key over the other. It could have to do with the fact that, let's say you're writing for a string instrument. String players generally like to play in sharp keys. They're used to it. If you're writing for a brass player, such as a trumpet players are usually more comfortable playing in flat keys. So you might write their part in C flat instead of B major. So that's more of an orchestration issue where you have to learn what's common for each instrument and you try and create parts that are easy for the performer to read. But the point is there's actually only a total of 12 key signatures. You got C, G, D, A, E, B, F sharp, C sharp. B, F sharp, and C sharp will share with C flat, G flat, and D flat, so those extra 3 key signatures don't really count. And then you have A flat, E flat, B flat, F. If you count all those up, excluding the duplicates, where you have enharmonic key signatures, you'll notice you have a total of 12 keys. So one thing to note is that moving to the right from C, everything moves in an ascending perfect fifth. So C goes to G. If you calculate that, C to G is 5 scale degrees and 7 half steps. That's going to be true of all of these key signatures. G to D is another perfect fifth. D to A is a perfect fifth. A to E is a perfect fifth. E to B is a perfect fifth. B to F sharp is a perfect fifth. F sharp to C sharp is a perfect fifth. So going to the right, you're ascending in perfect fifths. Going to the left, you're descending in perfect fifth. So C down to F is a perfect fifth. F down to B flat is a perfect fifth. B flat to E flat is also a perfect fifth, and so on. The circle always starts with C, which has no sharps, no flats, and you'll notice that. In the top image with the C below it, that's indicating C major, there are no accidentals. So C major is your pure key signature with no sharps, no flats. As you move to the right, you add 1 sharp. So G has 1 sharp. D has 2 sharps. A has 3 sharps. E has 4, B has 5, F sharp has 6, C sharp has 7. Eventually you'll just memorize these key signatures, but for now, the circle of fifths is a very useful tool for identifying these keys. It's the same thing with the flats as you're going down and to the left of the circle of fifths. So we start on C with 0 sharps and 0 flats, and then we go to F, which has 1 flat. B flat has 2, E flat has 3, A flat has 4, D flat has 5, G flat 6, and C flat has 7 flats. So that's how you figure out your key signatures, and we use the letter name for the first note of each scale in the key signature. So in the key of C, if you wanted to create a C major scale, you'd write the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B. In the key of G, if you want to make a G major scale, you start on G and you write G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and then G. So you use the sharps from the key signature to figure out your major scales. And this is a concept we're going to discuss a little more later. For now, just know that in the circle of fifths, you rotate to the right in ascending perfect fifths, and then add 1 sharp for each new key. And you rotate to the left in descending perfect fifths, and add 1 flat for each new key. Now there's more information on this in the textbook, but this is a general idea of how the major circle of fifths works. The minor circle of fifths is the same thing, except instead of starting on C major, we start on A. So one way to figure out the difference between your major and minor circle of fifths is to start with your major and count up 6 scale degrees. So if you go C, D, E, F, G, A is the 6th scale degree of C. If you remember, one sharp from the major key would be a G major key signature. Then the minor would be the 6th scale degree of G. So G, A, B, C, D, E. And you'll notice that A to E in the minor circle of fifths is also a perfect fifth. So just like the major circle of fifths, the minor circle of fifths will start on a note that has no sharps and no flats in the key signature. So for major, we start on C. In minor, we start on A. And then we just rotate to the right in perfect fifths and add 1 sharp as we go. And we rotate to the left in descending fifths and we add 1 flat as we go. So D minor has 1 flat, G minor has 2, C minor has 3, F has 4, and so on. If counting perfect fifths is a little bit difficult for you right now, it's still important to get used to counting up 7 half steps, but one quicker way where you can create your circle of fifths is to simply count up 5 scale degrees and add in the sharps or flats later. So when moving to the right, we just count up 5 scale degrees. So C to G, we know it's 5 scale degrees, so write G for the next key signature. Then count up another 5 scale degrees, you hit D, then A, E, B, F, and C. And you don't need to worry about writing in sharps at this point. So what you do next is you just add 1 sharp for each key as it moves around. So G, you have 1 sharp. D, you add another to get 2 sharps. A, you have 3. E, you have 4. B, you have 5. F sharp, you have 6. And C sharp, you have 7. So now what you need to do, and this is important, the name of the key has to relate to the actual key signature. Now what I mean by this is the key of G. If you look at the key signature, you only have 1 sharp, and that's an F sharp. There is no G sharp. So the key cannot be G sharp major. It has to be G major. For D, there's no D sharp in the key signature, so it's just D major. For A, there's no A sharp, so it's just A major. Same with E and B. Now when we get to F sharp, suddenly the key signature does have an F sharp in it. So it can't be F. It can't be F because there's an F sharp in the key signature. So that one has to be F sharp. C sharp, same thing. There's a C sharp in the key signature, so it has to be C sharp. With the flats, you just go the opposite direction. You count down 5 scale degrees, you write F, B, E, A, D, G, C. And then you just add in your flats, and you figure out which keys are flat and which ones are natural. In the case of F, it's a little bit weird because it's the only flat key that doesn't have a flat in the name. There's no F flat in the key signature. So F has to just be F major. There is no flat, so we don't call it F flat. All the others do have a flat in the key signature that corresponds to the name of the key. So in the example right below F, if you go to the left 1 key signature, you get B. There's a B flat in the key signature, so that has to be the key of B flat. That's very important because otherwise it becomes difficult to differentiate between F major with a flat key and F major and a sharp key. So it's important you list the accidental when it occurs in the key signature. Finally, we have 3 key signatures that will use, or 3 sets of key signatures that will sound the same but use different key signatures. As I said before, brass players tend to prefer flats, string players tend to prefer sharps. Modulations, when you're moving from one key to another, that may affect your choice of key signature. So if you're moving from a sharp key to another key, you'd probably want to move to another sharp key. So you choose one enharmonic option over another to make sure that everything stays consistent. You might also want to choose a key signature that's just structurally important. So if you're in a sharp key and you want to move to a flat key like F major, maybe you'd go from B major to C flat major, and then you could switch over to F major at some point if the piece started in C major or G major, a key that's generally sharps. C actually isn't a key of sharps, but G major or D major would be a good example. And that's the whole structural consideration is something a little more complex, and you really can't get into that until you have more knowledge about how chord progressions work. But just know there's a lot of reasons for these enharmonically equivalent key signatures. And the composer likely chose one key over another for a very particular reason. So when you're analyzing music, if you ever get to that point, you need to pay attention to the key that the composer used and try and figure out why that composer may have chose one key over another. Why he would choose or she would choose B instead of C flat, or F sharp instead of G flat, or C sharp instead of D flat. One final concept is theoretical key signatures. Now, this is not something you really need to understand to be a musician, but understanding theoretical key signatures helps to reinforce the concept of key signatures in general. So the major circle of fifths ends on the key C sharp on the sharp side. If you remember, you go from C, G, D, A, E, B, F sharp. Last key signature is C sharp. However, you could keep moving around the circle to get theoretical keys that match existing keys. And what I mean by that is the theoretical keys would correspond on the sharp side to a flat key that already exists. This will make more sense in the next slide when I show you an example of this. But these theoretical keys can come in handy when calculating certain intervals, a concept we're going to have to address later. So if you want to figure out the next key after C sharp, you'd still have to count up 5 scale degrees and 7 half steps. So a perfect fifth above C sharp is a G sharp, which means that the next key after C sharp would be G sharp. But that key would look like our first example here, with the double sharp on the F line. Since that's confusing to read, and we already have an A flat major key signature that's much simpler to read, because G sharp and A flat are the same key, they'll sound the same, it would be better just to use the key of A flat. So it's going to be very unusual for you to actually see a G sharp major key signature. It really shouldn't occur. It should be written in A flat. If we go one step further, G sharp up another perfect fifth. A perfect fifth above G sharp is D sharp. So now you have to take and make the first two accidentals in D sharp double sharps. So essentially what's happening here is if you look at your G major key signature, there's one sharp. So in order to make it G sharp major, you then have to put in all 7 sharps and raise that first sharp a half step. So it goes from F sharp to F double sharp. For D major, we have 2 sharps. So what you have to do there is raise the first 2 sharps and make them double sharps, and then add the remaining sharps in the key signature. So let's look at that for a second. Here, the second key signature is G. Notice there's 1 sharp. If you want to make it G sharp, you have to add every sharp in the key signature. So you have F, C, G, D, A, E, B, and then you have to go back and make that first F sharp a double sharp. So that gives us G sharp. D sharp, you'd have F double sharp and C double sharp. And then the rest of the sharps would have to be filled in too. So you'd have F, C, G, D, A, E, B. All those sharps would be there. Then F sharp and C sharp would be raised to make double sharps. With flats, it's the same thing. You see the key of F major has 1 flat. If you want F flat major, think about it for a second. What would you have to do? Pause the recording if you need to. If you said you'd have to add in all the flats and then make the first flat a double flat, so B double flat, you would be correct. So it would look like the key of C flat, but the first flat would be a double flat. And that's actually how you figure out all of your theoretical key signatures. And this is going to be useful later on. So this concept is important to learn, but there's other ways to calculate intervals as well. But we can use theoretical key signatures to calculate both intervals and major and minor chords. So take a moment and figure out the theoretical sharp keys for A flat, E flat, B flat, F, and C. So what I'm asking you to do here is find out the enharmonic key for A flat. We know that the enharmonic equivalent note to A flat is G sharp. So for the first key, you should figure out how many sharps are in G sharp and what sharps are double sharped. So pause the video, figure out your answers, and then on the next slide I will show you the answers and I'll talk about this with you. So here are your answers. The theoretical key for A flat is G sharp. G sharp is theoretical, A flat is a practical key. A flat is one we use, G sharp is one we don't. So to figure out G sharp, you find out what the key of G is. You add all the sharps, so it should look like C sharp major. But then you make that first sharp a double sharp. For E flat, the theoretical key is D sharp. So you find your key of D, it has two sharps. So add all your sharps so it looks like C sharp major. Make the first two double sharp, so you've got F double sharp and C double sharp. And now you have the key of D sharp major. B flat is equivalent to A sharp. So look at your A key signature. It has three sharps. Make those first three double sharp and then fill in the rest of the sharps for the key. And you've got your A sharp key signature. So this is how it works. It's actually not that complicated, but it's a very useful thing to know how to do. Just keep in mind it's also possible to create flat theoretical key signatures, but you'd have to use double flat. So these would be even more rare because they're going to be very confusing. But the theoretical flat key to G major would be A double flat. So an A double flat, if you look at the piano and you find the note A, if you lower it one half step, you get A flat, and another half step, you end up on the key G. So A double flat and G are the same note, but they're just going to be written differently. So if you had A double flat as a theoretical key signature, what you do is you go down and you find out what your key of A flat normally is. You see there are four flats. So now fill in the rest of the flats so it looks like C flat major, and then double flat the B, E, A, and D. That would give you your A flat theoretical key signature.